at 6 p.m. on February the 21st. Let's have a roll call, please.
Yes.
Present?
Here.
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 Okay, let's stand up and do the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Item number 4, approval of minutes from the meeting of January 30th. Now, there was a couple of misspellings of names in there, and I said just correct them. We don't need to do that. That's Scribner's error. That doesn't require any kind of authority to correct it. The clerk can just correct that. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? I'll take a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimous. Review of the first quarterly report for fiscal 2017. I believe this is you, Ken.
This will be
Take it away,
my
please.
little show, yes. Okay, we do the standard resolution and agenda packet for the council and provide it to the committee members. There were no additional changes that the council had not acted on during the quarter that required their approval. Otherwise, there's changes approved administratively by the city manager. One of the biggest items is when the council reduced the millage this past September to the 3.8000 that and decided to repay only half of the amount that was expended on the early retirement program. They said that the difference in dollars then would be put in an account that would be used for road work. So in the quarter, then we made the adjustment to reallocate the $132,000 toward additional street repaving. And the other big item was the purchase of 2 dump trucks. We had one of those scheduled this year, but we felt like the pricing was good and the timing appropriate to go ahead and replace 2. As far as the graphics that I provide to you, as far as general fund, the unassigned reserve balance, according to the CAFR, and the audited number then at the end of the year was 5.526. So this is considering that part of that is set aside.
So that is the audited fund balance as
It
of
is the audited
9/30.
number, yes. And I'll interject here and report to you that the CAFR, the Comprehensive Financial Report for the city, for the audited report, was delivered February 17th, which is 1 month earlier than last year. So I'm kind of proud to report that, and we hope to continue making those reports a little bit more timely than we've had in the past. Another highlight is that the major sources of revenue, which is what makes up 71% of the budgeted revenue for general fund, which is the electric franchise fee, the electric utility tax, and the half-cent sales tax, are ahead of projections. And I wanted to point out as well that the other major sources of income for citywide, the gas tax, the discretionary sales tax, and the stormwater fees are about $66,000 higher than projected for this point in the year. So generally the governmental funds look pretty well for the first quarter. Department spending, there's a couple of departments slightly over the 25% mark at the end of December. There were some special expenditures that normally happen at this time of the year in those departments. We also had the effect of the overtime in the police department because of the hurricane. So generally, everything looks in order there. The enterprise funds, the golf course, of course, is showing a negative effect as far as revenues versus expenses. And most of that is due to improvements made or repairs made to the facilities, all with the intent that, by what we do to improve the course will result in an increase in play and an increase in revenues, and ultimately that they can somehow start showing some improvement in their revenue picture. Airport is looking satisfactory as far as revenues over expenses. Of course, they are supported to a great extent by being able to match grants for improvements out at that facility with DST funds. Building department, the permits for the quarter were down over the previous quarters, but we had a couple of good quarters before that. And you'll see in the narratives that are provided later in the report that the building official basically says that's the contractors were focusing on cleaning up their inventory and completing projects as opposed to pulling new permits for additional properties. I don't want to ramble on and on. You got a lot of detail as far as each fund of the city and each department of general fund on where they stand on their budget in summary form. Capital projects, I asked Frank Watanabe, our city engineer, to join us tonight and give you a briefing on the capital projects, particularly the ones that he's been involved in. So Frank, if you want to just give a little discussion of some of the significant projects that you can update.
I'll be happy to. Again, I'm Frank Watanabe, the city engineer. Ken asked me to give you just kind of like a brief update on where we sit with CIP projects, which is our capital improvement program. Again, just a little education on some of these projects. You may look at some of the projects and why they, hate to say, drag on so long. A lot of the projects are tied in with grant sources, and within those grant sources, we have to take care of, make sure all the permitting and design, and that's where in this city we wrap it all as one big project, where typically in most cities you have the design, the permitting as a front phase, advertise, go to construction. Then in the grant programs, you have to do the monitoring and the testing and the education, and that may go on 2 years after a project. So a project may have a 1 year, 2 year construction period, but you may have 2 years in front of it for the design and all the permitting, and maybe 2 years afterwards for the testing and monitoring. To explain that, a good example is we have what we call the presidential streets. We are going to be closing that project this June. This project will finally close out. It was under construction back in 2014. It opened up in 2012, but the last test and the last component will be done this period right now, this quarter, and the closeout date is June of 2017. So that's one big project that's been on the book for a long time. Other projects we have is like the airport projects, what we call the Main Street, which was both the airport drive paving and expansion, as well as the storage building. That was all part of the city and airport project. That was a large project too that started in 2015. That's going to close out too. The remaining component was a camera that we have to take care of. Once we take care of that, that project will be closed out. Other project we have is Hangar C. Just want to give you an update. Hangar C, we poured the pad today. So we had over 50 cement trucks this morning. We started at 3 o'clock this morning, so we took care of that concrete pad, and they'll start erecting it. The schedule is to have the CO by June of this year. So that project is moving along, but it took a long time to get us there. A lot of it was dealing with the FAA and the grants and the programs, but that project is in construction. We're on target to have the final building and CO by June of 2017. So we're on schedule for there. Working waterfront, we have a project right now with the restroom that's actually out in design. This one got held up with permitting. Some of these permitting agencies, it's a challenge because we think it's going to be St. John's, and we find out later on it's DEP.
Which phase are you talking about, Frank?
This
2
is
or
phase
3?
2. This is phase 2 of the working waterfront. That's our public restroom. A good portion of that's being funded through the FINE, which is the Florida Inland Navigational District grant source. That project is moving forward with the design phase right now, and we're held up right now with the DEP permit. The Phase 3, per city manager's direction, we're going to hold. We were going to go after the funding for find again for this year, but since Phase 2 is not completed, it wouldn't look, from an application standpoint for a grant, if you haven't finished the second phase, why go after the third phase? So we're going to hold off on the Phase 3 until we get the Phase 2 completed. We're hoping to get the permit in the next few months and then go out and advertise and hope to be out before June for that project for construction. The Cab Corps project's still in the books. We have some minor stuff that our Public Works Department's working on, but the majority of the project through the contractor has been completed. That was tied in with several other parking projects, which was the police parking and the dialysis parking. All those are completed and done, and that's good. The Indian River Lagoon, we have a grant that was given to us a while back, and I just extended that grant. The Indian River Lagoon grant was for this was our second oyster bag project, was to install oyster bags. We had the first one that was a pilot project through the Boy Scouts. That was completed last year. This one, we got grant money from the Indian River Lagoon Council to install oyster bags in the working waterfront between the shoreline and the marina. The issue is, why start that project when we're going to be doing all these other construction works? So we told the lagoon, can we wait until we finish these phases and then do the oyster bag project? And they all agreed. It makes sense. The agencies all agreed. So we're going to hold on that until such time those other phases are done, and then the oyster bags will be the last phase. But the grant still is good. We have that. Other buildings, the PD evidence building, we just got the permit last week, St. John's permit. It was held up for the permitting. Now that I got permit in hand, we will advertise that building next week for construction, give it a 30-day advertisement, close the advertisement, award the contract to the contractor, hope to have it then constructed by June. So that's another project moving along. New projects this year, just want to give you a heads up, we have a couple of construction projects. That's why I was wearing my vest. We started our milling and paving project. If you go out to Schumann's been done. It's been paved. The streets right now that are under construction, Concha, Bevan, and Vosel are being grinded right now, being milled. So those streets within the next few days will be paved, pending weather, pending conditions. So that takes care of a large chunk of our milling and paving projects. Soon after those projects are completed, we'll start, because it's the same contractor, we'll start the Vosel and Barber Street reconstruction. That project will then tear out the old base material, put in a whole new base and a whole new roadway structure, just like Barber Street. That's where the extra money went for the millage we were talking about. That money went into that portion which is doing now the Vosel section. So the section between Roseland and Barber Street, Vosel, that road section is the base is gone. So that's going to be totally torn out and put back in as reconstruction. So those projects are moving along. And then the last one I just want to talk about is the sewer to septic. That's another Indian River Lagoon grant program. I just checked on it. We have, right now, allocated about $70,000 of the $330,000 we have set aside. Of the $330,000, $100,000 of it is the grant money that we have matching from the Indian River Lagoon. So just want to give you an update. That's where we sit with that project. And that's the list of all the ones that I'm working on within engineering, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I know you talked, I remember a couple of meetings ago, you had talked about the progress on Joy Haven and Barber, about some sort of grant you were applying for. I was wondering the progress on that. I remember a couple committee members talked about the need for some sort of traffic light on Joy Haven and Barber, and then you had talked about, again, the grant and how the grant, one of the requirements was that there needed to be a certain amount of cars passing through the bridge in order for that grant to be fulfilled. And again, I was just wondering about the progress on how far the grant has been completed.
It's a disappointment on this project. What it was is we have two intersections on Barber Street and Joy Haven and Concha. I don't want to. It's got a limited sight distance. As you come up to it because of the bridge and the guardrail, and because of those issues, we've had a lot of concerns and a lot of complaints. No accidents, but a lot of concerns, a lot of complaints regarding to improve that sight distance. You really can't physically improve it beyond, the best thing would be, if you can't improve the physical structure, you need to control the right-of-way, which is then to put in either a stop sign, which the volumes are too high, you put in a traffic signal. I approached the MPO, we looked at different traffic safety funding grants, and the one we thought was best was, they call it Safe Routes to School. This location does have a school bus stop. This location does pick up a lot of students, has student activities, because the sidewalk is on that side of the road. We thought it was a good idea from the MPO, so I moved forward with the grant application, did a presentation to the MPO Traffic Safety Committee. They all endorsed it, they liked it, took it upon their community group, and they supported it too. Everything was moving forward. We had support from 2 of the county commissioners. And then I had some discussions with FDOT on the Safe Routes to School is a funding mechanism that comes out every year. So it's funded through the feds. They didn't think it was a good idea. It was a stretch. A Safe Routes to School for the infrastructure is really to put in sidewalks. They emphasize that strongly. You have to show a above and beyond cost if it's not a sidewalk. They do fund traffic signals and pedestrian signals, but you have to have a real justifiable cost that, it's really to help improve safety for kids to walk to school. And so unless you truly have a location that's truly causing a hazard of some sort and that signal is really needed for kids to walk to school, it didn't rate high. And because of that, they pretty much said, good luck. When I got that, it's like, forget it, I'm dropping the application. It's not worth, it's not worth throwing in a bad egg. And then they start questioning future eggs you want to submit. So because I know those people, when I was a consultant, I did a lot of work with these agencies, I said, I'll back off and we'll look at other funding sources. And that's where we sit right now. I'm looking at other funding sources.
Question, on the Safe School, was that out of the school district's budget, or?
So that's the Safe Routes to School is an FDOT funding source that's actually using federal dollars. Every state gets a proportion dollar amount, just like your local gas tax. There's a certain amount of money set aside for Safe Routes to School, and it's federal dollars.
Okay, is there anything under the Florida Highway Administration, or?
Again, it's under the Federal Highway Administration. It gets funneled through FDOT. FDOT's the actual, in this state, you could say they're the ones who deal with the applications and the funding sources. A lot of federal grants go through the state first, and the state manages it. Rarely do you work directly with the state unless you have a disaster like FEMA, or you really have a huge federal project like an interstate project. Then the feds, you're working directly with the federal government. Typically, you work with a local state agency, either it's the DOT and sometimes even the county. But again, I tried with the FDOT Safe House School coordinators, and I've applied for many grants and gotten grants from that FDOT Safe House School, and it's mainly for sidewalks.
Well, the MPO, that there's no other funding sources available?
Yeah, the MPO is, I call the MPO kind of like the bank. They pull money sources from all these other agencies, federal, state. The MPO really doesn't have a money source that they derive from beyond, like saying, regional funds. But it's really, they help focus and get the transportation improvement program. There's a list of our regional and larger projects, and hopefully we have one, and that they help then manage to make sure it gets funded from a state and federal standpoint. It gets on the list that they call it the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, and that's how, as that project moves up the list, you eventually get on the state or federal funds.
And the county doesn't have any funding from gas taxes or anything that could be applied?
They pretty much use their local gas tax like we do to pave roads.
Is there any projection as to what it might cost for some traffic regulation at that intersection or those intersections?
Yeah, we did, as the application required, we did some almost close to full design of the 2 traffic signals. You're looking at about $300,000. Yeah, because we're looking at, we're not doing the span wire, we're looking at poles, mast arms, the real signals. Nowadays, I mean, coming from California, we have only Florida and some of these eastern states still have span wires. Majority of signals are on poles and mast arms.
I was just concerned that those 2 intersections, we've got, due to the construction that the city had done for pedestrian, has now created a possible liability at those 2 intersections.
The last outsource that we're looking at in the long-term range, there's some money I'm going to hopefully go after. That bridge is still a bridge. There's highway bridge money there. It's not on the high list, but there's always in the future if you just keep pecking along. It's not rated poor, but it's getting, eventually, FDOT does an inspection every year, and eventually, it's gonna keep dropping down in terms of its need to replace it. So there's highway replacement bridge money. There's also some, what they call hazard mitigation grant program, which is through the FEMA, which is through when you have disasters, you have to do pre-improvements, so say improving canals, improving bridges, so that way if you have a major disaster, if a bridge collapsed, that would be, detrimental for your, evacuation. So those are some future money sources I'm trying to tap into and trying to get applications, you could say hate to say project ready. The best way you get applications like Safe Routes to School, any federal grant is you have your project ready to go, it's designed, it's permitted, I hate to say it's shelved, and then when the money becomes available, they go down the pecking list and you don't have permits, you don't have plans, oh, you do, there's your money. And that's what I'm hoping to be, is hopefully be shelf ready on some of these projects.
And if you do that, if there's any matching requirement, is there anything that's been earmarked or set aside by the city for that?
Not at this time, and the sad thing is most of these grants are very competitive, and most of them more and more are getting to be, they used to be, almost 10 to 20% local match, they get to be more and more like 50%. And that's where the challenge is, when you try to find, for signals, 300,000, you're gonna match 150. That makes it challenging when we really need to be putting that money, like saying, to paving streets and taking care of the roads right now. This still is, an issue, and safety is always an issue, but, so are our streets, because if you get to the point where they're, so badly potted up, that's a safety issue too. So it's a balancing point we're looking at. Again, we monitor those intersections, you know what I'm saying? Right now, as I said, there's no accidents there, but, you go there, you understand why we're looking at trying to improve that location, those two locations. So it's on my list always to try to look at new grant opportunities.
Is there a bus stop there, a county bus stop there?
The GO line's there also.
The GO line.
Mhm.
And GO line, I believe they would have access to putting in an application for funding.
The GO line, again, all these funding sources have their own funding mechanisms. So the GO line comes with public transit funds, and they don't like to dilute those with roadway funds. They don't like to dilute those with school safety funds. They have their own funding mechanism for bus and rail and that kind of improvements through the transit funding source. And they shy away if you start doing too much beyond bus shelters, bus stops, maybe pullouts. But if you start talking about, like, a good example, sometimes some cities want to put in a separate bus lane. They start questioning those things. They say, are you sure that's a bus lane, not a roadway that you use when the buses aren't used? So, because transit money is used for transit improvements, buying buses, buying transit improvements from rail to other sources. They try to keep those to light amenities like shelters, you know what I'm saying, and maybe lighting.
That's true, but I know they also have access, other than just the landing pads and sidewalks and all that. Like when I was with Heartline Mass Transit over in Hillsborough County, we even looked at putting in roadways above roadways funding, which was very expensive, but the funding did come about. It's just the public wouldn't buy into that. So I was wondering if maybe the GO line might be able to access some of the funding or give us some help in that area.
I could ask Karen Diego, but a lot of those, when you say roadways, I coming from California, a lot of the transit funds were used for, you're right, if you have high occupancy lanes, you have a direct access for transit-only ramps, anything that was that kind of, and it's a structure and it's a road, yeah, but it's all transit-related. You start deviating that, like I'm saying, if you start looking at a good example, in a lot of the urbanized areas, they have queued jumpers where the bus pulls out into its own lane, but sometimes they use those for right turn lanes too. So it's a question, is that really a queue jumper, or you just built a right turn lane for your community, for the people when the buses aren't there? And so it's a gray area that the transit district don't like to fund. They like to purely put their money where it belongs to the transit improvements, and that includes from, buses to shelters. Like I said, you could build off-ramps off of freeways, but it's only for transit use only, you know what I'm saying, for high occupancy transit use only. You start mixing that up with public vehicles, it becomes very gray, and they start questioning the funding source.
Just trying to brainstorm here.
I've done a lot of funding grants and stuff, and so is Cindy back here, and it's harder and harder because everybody's figuring it out now. The quirks and try to get funding, and there's all types of grants. I don't just go after Transportation grants, we go after, some stormwater grants. I go after various types of grants from all different agencies. There's many different ways you could try to fund something. It's just trying to figure out sometimes to get the local match. That's the challenging part, because like I saying, our budget's already full and allocated out, and rarely do you see, like on our programs, you don't see anything that's been set aside. It's down to I think, what's needed for our infrastructure, for our CIPs. Again, the signal stuff came out of the community standpoint. It is needed. At this time, it's not funded anywhere, but we're hoping to try to get some grant money.
Is there a possibility, I know that's a highly traveled area, for any kind of traffic signal, traffic signs other than a light? Or would that be slow the traffic down too much? Like a four-way stop?
Yeah, the Barber Street, I looked at a four-way stop. The problem with the four-way stop is when you have the volumes exceed a certain point, you create a huge queuing of vehicles. No different if a traffic signal malfunctions and it queues up a bunch of cars. Once you start queuing up vehicles beyond a certain point, then it's almost difficult to clear that queue, the backup of cars. Then what tendency happens is that queue gets so large, you start having rear ends because people don't realize that the cars are backed up because it's so far from the intersection now you weren't thinking about it. So rarely do you want to put an all-way stop when the main street has so much volumes. In this situation, probably 10 times more than the side street. Unless you really have to put one in, then there'll be a signal. Because the signal, what you can do is activate it only when there's a side street volumes are there, clear them out real fast, and then reopen the main street again. So that's why a signal would work. An all-way stop is there, and you got to stop all the vehicles. And the queue would just be large, and to the point
Yeah,
where
I
it'd be a
figured the
safety
queue would be
issue.
large. Rear-enders at 30-mile-per-hour speed limit seems unlikely.
But I got,
but,
safety, both issues, what I'm saying, is it more safer to make an all-way in the current situation? I think it'd be to find other options. I think an all-way stop would be a lot more of a safety issue on that roadway, because it is a heavily volume, it's a regional roadway. It's a regional roadway, bottom line. It's an arterial that carries regional traffic. Just to have that kind of a number over 50,000, I think it's like 60,000, that's not Sebastian traffic, that's regional traffic.
Thank you.
Frank, while I got you here, we've got you here, looking forward, because that's what we're going to be doing, roads. Off the top of your head, in this new budget, we're probably not going to be anywhere near the amount of money that we're spending this year, or are we? And we're spending over $700,000 this year. What do you think we're going to be next year?
The problem I have this year, and this year the reason why it jumped was because we're trying to jump ahead of road conditions. The weather has caused some of our roads to accelerate. I hate to say it, the rain we've had last year and the rain we've been having, not today of course, but in the past, has caused some of our roads to deteriorate farther. I have yet, I was wanted to go out to do my roadway assessment every spring. This time I go out and check all our roads. The problem I had was, FEMA came along, the hurricane came along, so those FEMA stuff been kind of holding me back. But in that process of going out there and doing the debris monitoring and picking up debris, I was on most of the streets. We have a lot of roads that I thought was okay last year is not okay this year. The problem I have is most of these cracks are surface cracks, so I can mill it and pave it over at a lot cheaper cost is when it starts to get to the base. Once I start losing that base, and then I'm tearing out that whole roadway, and then you're talking about 3 to 4 to 10 times the cost, then I could just mill it and pave it. Like saying milling and paving, we took care of a big chunk of Schumann in 2 days. And, it was a lot quicker and a lot faster, very little inconvenience. People were in and out, because it's just milling and paving. Reconstruct, as you saw with Barber Street, Fleming, Main Street, it'll take 4 to 5, 6 months to tear out the whole road, tear out the whole base, compact the sub-base, put the whole new base back in, then pave a whole new road. That's why it costs so much. That's why we try to catch it before it becomes a full reconstruction project. I have yet to go out there. I know the list I gave Ken is still pretty good, the ones I have already identified to be replaced for this coming year. I just don't know how much more of the existing road that I thought was okay is now, tilting more towards the poor and bad. Bad is when it's full reconstruct. And typically what happens, if it's questionably poor, I'll go out there and have our geotechnicals core it, and the cores will tell me if the structure's gone.
Okay, so just so I know you're thinking about it, because the city's gonna be looking at that, and the budget committee is gonna be looking at it. It's something that we've looked at, as you know, for the last 4 or 5 years, and have increased the funding. We hoped maybe we'd get on the downslope on this thing. Anyway, you've got it in hand.
I hope I do.
Yeah, we'll see where it goes. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions on the CIP plan?
Can we go back to the budget?
Well, right now Frank's here dealing with just the CIP portion of the budget. How about you, Mike?
No, sir.
I have a couple comments, more like suggestions. Typically, what I like to look at in the capital improvement budget, because it's very difficult for me to tell the source of the funds here when I look at these things. I don't know where the hell the money's coming from. And I go to your budget and look at it, and all I see is the pages, and I see transfers. And then I have to find another fund that the transfer went into. Typically, what I like to see in a 5-year capital improvement plan is a page or 2 pages that shows revenues, the sources of funds, and the projects listed, everyone that's funded. See, here you got projects from, goes from 2012, the presidential streets is still, it's 96.38% done, and it's still got money hanging in it there, but I don't see it anyplace else, so I assume you're still working on it.
That's the one we're doing the final testing and monitoring, which we should close out in
Now,
June.
normally, when you have these things and they carry over for multiple years, don't you reappropriate the money and put it in the current year in the new CIP instead of just leaving it 5 years behind? Because it's very difficult to follow this without working in it every day. I can't tell where the money's coming from, and I'm an expert. I've done this for 40 years, and it's very difficult for me to tell. I mean, I can guess on some of them, but I don't know whether it's coming from gas tax, whether it's coming from DST. I go to your budget, I see transfers from the general fund. It's hard to follow where that goes because it goes everywhere. And then on the expenditure side in the CIP, there should be expenditure line items that line up with the names of the grants. It would make it much easier to follow them. And then if you need, and you've got your 5 years laid across the page, see, this only has, this got 5 years up and down. So if you do that 5 years like that, it makes it much easier to look at. It might make it easier for your council to look at it too and follow what's going on. And then when the priorities get changed, see, in these things, this one waits. See, you just said Joe's waiting on the working waterfront that's in the fiscal 17 budget to 400,000. He's giving you guys instructions to wait that. That might be nice if we knew that, if there was a hold on a CIP item. Then I have one more question. When I looked at the year-to-date numbers, I noticed when you did your budget revision for the first quarter, you took $115,856 appropriated from fund balance in the general fund. Where did that go? Because I looked at your budget amendment and I couldn't tell. It's showing up in the general fund in a revised budget on the extra sheets that you sent me. See, it's got a revised budget. I assume when you did this first quarterly thing, you revised the numbers in the budget when the council approved it. Well, it's got appropriation from fund balance, $115,856.
I'm not following what report you're talking about.
I'll show you. That confused me because when I read your other stuff, I couldn't tell where it went.
Oh, that,
Yeah, this. And I couldn't find it on those other things you did. It must be a combination of things.
it's everything that happened in the first quarter that affected the fund balance. So
How do
that,
we find out what that is?
you look at this page here.
I gotta add them up. See, I don't know whether these are general
Yeah,
fund. I don't.
Exactly, yeah, we've just never,
I can't trace the source of funds.
we try to give you guys like a big picture
Yeah.
as opposed to getting, consuming all our time on detail, so. As far as your question on the capital program, we have a whole section in the budget document.
I looked at everything. I couldn't put the number. I added up several things in there, but the numbers didn't foot. So that's all the comments I have on the CIP. I guess we can move on to,
I did want to comment, Larry, on the quarterly investment report and the
Yes.
cash reserves. I had indicated at the last quarterly report that we had broken out $500,000 into
Can I interrupt a second? You didn't come down the line here. The two of us left, and we might have something to say on the CIP.
you got more questions? Why didn't you ask them when you had the floor?
It was coming down the line. I'm sorry.
He started and you went next, and then I went down there. If you got more questions, Harry, please ask them before we move on.
Yes, just two quick questions, and I didn't know if Sergio had one before me. Okay. On the CIP, for the computers and the police vehicles, is there a annual budget for those items? Replacement?
Of course, yes.
And there is, and is there I'm trying to find out, is there a policy generally for that, like 25% a year or 20% a year?
We've used generally a number for the police cruisers, for that fleet, of about 6 to 7 per year are necessary to keep those in a good state of repair.
And 6 or 7 a year gives you roughly how many years on the vehicles?
I think it's about 5 to 6 years before they are either surplused or reassigned.
Okay, and on the computers, is that like a 5-year replacement plan, 20% or something like that? Or?
We generally use a 5-year plan, but with technology changes, it's like every year there's some new technology that opens up that makes it difficult to forecast, what kind of expenditures we're going to make 5 years from now on IT type services.
But you budget roughly 20% a year? Or?
Well, for years we didn't budget hardly anything for IT, and that's why I believe it's been about 4 years ago now, that we changed out all the personal computers, all the printers, and invested like a one-shot deal that we expected to last at least 5 years. At that point, we also allocated another $50,000 out of DST funds to improve some of the back office type software and connections to the internet and that type of thing, telephone.
In the backbone.
I mean, it's been so fluid. The last few years, we've kind of settled in with about a $50,000 a year investment in whatever we feel is the most pressing need. So you'll see, as we do the capital program, particularly for the IT items, there will be things that weren't there 2 years ago when we started projecting, the future year expenditures, and it's just a very difficult area to forecast. But we do want to continue allocating some substantial amount of funds just to try to keep up with the technology and not get behind again.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to find out, if you had a plan of roughly 20% plus contingencies. So
we actually
that
have
you
a
wouldn't have to get into a lump sum every.
We actually have a consultant that has been looking over our shoulders and giving us advice. So he's been employed kind of on an on-call basis, and he kind of monitors what's going on with the IT operation and what progress they're making on getting up to date in some areas. Minimal cost, but we employed him just about a year and a half or 2 ago, and that's been very enlightening. And sometimes as staff, we get involved in the day-to-day crisis management and reaction type and set aside the longer term need. So it's been
Ken, we do have 152,000 in, set aside in FY 2017 for network upgrades and servers.
and even that is there again, with a consultant's assistance, he's leading us in a direction of, rather than having a lot of hard server-type equipment is utilized in the cloud for some of our backup and redundancy-type
And I think
needs.
2018, if I remember correctly, it was when we're going to hit the 5 years on all of the regular computers and laptops, and they'll probably get changed out, so that'll probably be in 2018. To answer your question, when they started did it the last time, they're going to roll it on a 5-year basis. That's what they're set up to do, MIS is.
So you're set up to replace all of them every 5 years instead of
That's-
20%
that's
a year
the-
every?
That's the idea, because historically, so I'm told, the technology will change enough so that over a 5-year period, you need to change them. Now, for instance, they just approved moving the whole city from Windows 7 to Windows 10. That money was just approved, which was roughly $50,000 that I remember. That was done in the last.
Yeah, I understand that. I was just.
But there is a
on the
5-year
hardware part, I thought it might be a little easier to replace 20% a year than 100% every 5 years, so. That's
the
what I was
problem-
trying to find out.
The problem that they've had, they talked about that, because I sat in on some of this early on. Part of the problem with doing that is then you have different years and different technologies throughout the city. And that ends up being a problem, especially if you have a major software operating system change. So the conclusion was, and I don't know, I haven't heard this changed, and I haven't got my ears to that, but that it's easier to do and less expensive ultimately.
Well,
That's what I was told.
had different experiences with
Shouldn't
larger
matter if the
organizations,
software is
but
compatible and you got the same operating system. Shouldn't matter. Now, you're gonna have a problem trying to navigate between 7 and 10. That's not gonna work out too well. But if everybody had 10 or everybody had 7, it shouldn't be an issue whether this computer was 3 years old or this one was 5. It really shouldn't matter, as long as the operating system was the same and the software is the same.
that's true, as long as you don't get past the 5-year period. Then you do have some difficulties between them. I was just wondering why we didn't do that instead of a large number every 5 years, so. Just a thought, maybe we ought to, the board might want to look into it. City councilman may want to look at a 20% versus 100% every 5 years.
You mean actually change the computers or set aside 20% of the money?
Replace 20% of the hardware, the computers, the PCs, not your backbone.
That might be something you could work to, but it looks like in 2014, that's what you redid that, right? When you spent $263,000, that's what you did. You did them all.
That's correct.
Yeah. So now you would only be replacing them as the technology changed, or you wanted to upgrade, or somebody's computer died.
If I understand it, our advice at that time was to replace the entire,
I assume that was for that amount of money, yeah.
and, along with that advice was, look at doing this like every 5 years because technology changes and there's advantages to the staff that we have when they react to problems, if they're dealing with one versus another and, whether to replace it. And so, I think we took action at that time based on the professionals' advice.
So the only reason I
And-
brought that up is because other agencies I've been at where it took a while to get onto a 20% a year, a 5-year or a 4-year program, depending on the agency. But once you got onto that, then you had a set number, fairly stable number, it varied a few thousand, of course, with inflation and all. But you'd have a number that you would replace every year, and you would never have to worry about, is any of the equipment going to be obsolete, because they would all be 5 years or less in age, And so you never had to worry about, hey, every 5 years, I got to come up with a big number and replace all these PCs.
I'm sure we'll be looking at it as it comes, time to react after that 5th year, as to whether that's still a valid presumption or to consider something like you're suggesting.
Just a thought. It seemed like it might be cost-effective and not have to worry about,
I don't know, with the
obsolete equipment.
CIP plan the way you got, $263,000 that you spent in 14 doesn't seem to me like a heavy lift for this fund. So if you budgeted them once every 5 years, I wouldn't see any issue with that. Because if you set aside 20% each year before the year ends, you're gonna take that money and use it for something else. Because if you don't buy that computer, you're gonna spend that money on something else.
And I think historically, those were the choices
That's
made.
exactly
we
what I
start
see when I
trying
look
to
at-
balance the budget in hard times and what goes, those things that are just
Exactly.
arbitrary, so. And that was what the consultants were telling us, you need to have some discipline, you need to have some plans to count on spending the money to keep things up to date, so.
Thank you.
More?
No, that's it.
That it?
Thank you.
Okay, now let's do the investment update, Ken.
Right, I did want to remind you that, the last quarter, thank you, Frank, so much for
Thanks,
helping
Frank.
with the capital. The investment of our funds, we took $500,000 and went into a different trust fund to basically split our pots into 3 separate kitties. We have the State Board of Administration with about $3 million of our money. We've got the local bank account, almost $10 million, and we have $500,000 now in this other vehicle. I reported last quarter that we'd actually lost a few $100 as opposed to having interest earnings. The month of January, they reported some substantial recovery, and I just checked today, through February 17th, there was some additional dollars added to that fund. If you annualize our returns since I sent the money off in October to them, the return is about 1.6% on an annualized basis. So we're still watching it. I'm not going to just use this last month or two as an indicator that we're totally satisfied or want to increase the amount of funds invested with that vehicle, but I am encouraged that at least they recovered what we had initially lost the first couple of months. So I wanted to point that out. I wanted to also...
Yeah, but Ken, would you think you're talking about adding money to that fund, to the Florida Trust?
My initial
In a
plan-
rising rate environment? That's gonna knock down your principal that's already there.
I'm
I
not
mean,
following.
the way, and I haven't talked to you specifically, but I interpret this as more like it's a mutual fund. I mean, you're putting your money in, commingling it, and everybody's, and your principal can be reduced by increases in interest rates.
Exactly, and that's
Reduces
what
the
happened the
value.
first
Yeah,
couple of
well, we're
months.
in a rising rate environment, probably over the next, through the rest of this year for at least. As opposed to the other 2 investments, which are basically like savings accounts. You throw the money in, you get a rate of return back, and you don't lose any principal on those.
The other 2 are money market, and you can lose.
Which one's a money market?
Both the State Board of Administration is basically a money market fund, or operates like a money market
Well, yeah,
fund.
they're money markets. You can't lose your principal, right?
I believe you can lose your principal.
Not in the money market.
I don't think so.
Not in the money market, it's insured.
I would think
you're
that.
Well, I know they're supposed to
Collateralized.
See,
keep
I
it at
haven't
a-
seen anything where you've said that in prior years, we've never discussed with the state board that you're gonna lose any principal.
I may stand corrected on that, because I think there is some, that they're required, I think, to keep the, every dollar invested marked at a value.
I think the
of
SBA has
$1.
like a 2-year duration, and that clerk's pool that you're in for the clerk of the courts, I think their duration's 2.5 to 3 years. So they gotta have some treasuries and some federal agencies in there.
Right.
It's not just a cash investment.
But what I recall is about 10 years ago, the SBA had some troubles, and we ended up losing a full month's interest on the funds, and they tied up about $3 million of the city's fund in an account that we could not withdraw from until they went through a recovery and a restructuring and a new
7
investment
years.
firm. So, you know, that,
Yeah, but that's credit related, yeah.
and that's what,
Okay.
kind of inspires me to say, let's not put all our eggs in one basket, whether it be the local bank or the SBA, and let's find some way to not only get at least a third pot, and to have, with this particular vehicle, they invest with a maturity no greater than 5 years, and their average maturity, I think, now runs about 2.5 years. But, I mean, by going out longer, you get a better yield. Right now, the state board is about 1%, the local bank is about 0.8%, and this fund, based on my calculations of where we are today, since we invested in October, is running about 1.6%. So I understand what you're saying as far as timing is important, and that's a mistake I probably made at the time I put in that $500,000 because of the market circumstances. But over the long term, they should show a higher yield. So I was trying to reach for that, and I was also trying to diversify.
It's kind of risky to go out 5 years, though, isn't it? What if you need the money?
No, these funds are withdrawal. You can withdraw the funds within 24 hours.
Not if it's in a 5-year investment.
No, it's a pool.
If it's in the
We're
pools,
not
if it-
buying specific
If
securities.
it's in the state pool or that clerk's thing, yeah, it is. But they don't have anything. I mean, they've got a few 3-year investments, not many. And they've got some 1-year investments, not many, but most of their stuff's 2 years in the 2-year line.
Correct.
So that's why their average maturity is like 2.5 years. I think the SBA is a little higher than that, isn't it? They went up a little bit. The SBA, I
They've
think,
gone
is
up, but
right at 3 years.
I think today is like 1.01% is their
Yeah.
daily yield.
Yeah, they just went over 100 basis points, yeah. That's because they they went out a little farther on the ladder. That's what they did, that's what the SBA did.
Right.
I still don't trust the SBA from 2007. But I never had any money in it in 2007, so we didn't lose anything.
Ken, again, how much was that? Was that an initial 500,000 or an additional 500,000? To the,
I basically pulled money out of the bank account.
true, but how much was into the federal Florida Trust? How much did you invest?
500,000.
And that was just an initial amount?
That was the initial investment. Right now, it's like 500,000, 500 and
So
500.
it took you
600.
4 months to get back whole.
Yes.
Yeah, basically that's what you're saying, it took you 4 months to get your principal back.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Any more questions on the investments?
Okay, the reserve sheet on that same page, we do, indicate any kind of use of the R&R fund, the renewal and replacement monies. There was nothing actually drawn on that during the first quarter of the year. We did update the balance for the amount of the difference between revenues and expenses according to our policy of $158,834. So we at the end of the quarter, we stand at $414,000. This earmark in case we need to replace or repair something that wasn't budgeted for. I will tell you, this past week, there's been an estimate for the police department air conditioner of some $44,000 that will need to be drawn off this fund if we proceed with the proposal.
Gotta fix it.
Well, particularly with dispatchers involved, they're 24/7 sitting in their
Gotta fix
facility. Something has to be done. The time is one concern that we have, is because it takes weeks to get
Well, those
those
are big
type
units.
of units in. It's not like getting one off the shelf, I guess.
Yeah, that's a pretty good size unit.
So we're looking at backup plans with like portables if we have to, or something to get by with. So I wanted to point that out. The rest of the report, as you know, is the narratives from each department on some of their activities during the quarter. I think it pretty much tracks the numbers as far as when they're saying the revenues slowed down for that quarter, then it kind of matches the numbers of what the revenue figures look like. So that's all I really wanted to cover, but I'd be glad to go back and respond to any other comments.
Well, thank you for the report. Now, we've got an item on here, 2 alternate.
Wait a minute, questions, I didn't get a chance, I don't know, we kind of moved into that capital improvements. Ken, in the local option gas tax and the DST, the revenue collections for the first quarter are like 13, 14, 17%. Or are you concerned that we're not going to reach our budgeted
No,
numbers? I mean, the gas tax, everybody's saying we're not using enough gas.
Runs 60 days behind, doesn't it, Ken? You're 2 months behind collecting gas tax revenue from the county.
well, and call us lazy if you'd like to, but we don't do an accrual at the end
every
of each
month.
month, or even at the end of each quarter. I mean, so we're always lagging behind at least 1 month, and in some cases 2 months.
So it's a matter of them just, yes.
I mean, I totally appreciate it. It's hard to come in and just look from the outside at our bookkeeping and really reach conclusions, or, you know, and that's, I guess, when you have professionals here to try to help you out or help tell you if there is a problem.
Yeah, let me ask you also, the comment on the building section and the lack of permit activity and the revenue down is only 20% of what we have budgeted. How close is the city to being built out? And
The
there won't
city?
be any building activity. Or the building activity is gonna drop off, and we're not gonna see it coming. And because my concern with the building is we're using the building fund as a little savings account to lend to everybody else, all the other little departments that need money. The building fund, and suddenly the building fund's not gonna have any money.
There's only been one department, not to be picky, but it was only the golf course that we've actually loaned some
Yeah,
of the
one of
building
my
funds
pet
to.
peeves, the golf course.
I don't know, I used to know
I see
how
the
close
building
this-
fund being exposed here at some time.
I would guess this
the
city's
next
still got
couple of
somewhere
years.
between 30 and 40%
I mean, the building
left to build.
activity, if rates go up, home building isn't gonna continue like it is. And all of a sudden, the building department isn't gonna meet its general fund expenses because we're gonna over budget it. Just a comment to think about. Rising interest rates will curtail building, and that'll
Well, the
drop.
way he manages that, if he's 15% under his revenue projection, he watches that each year when they do these quarterly updates to the city council, and they slow back on the expenditures.
Well,
But you budget revenues and
Yes.
expenditures, but you spend cash, and you can't spend what you don't have.
yeah, I know, well, we ought to keep an eye on that.
Sure. That's his job. Okay.
Thank you.
We finished? That it? What am I supposed to do, introduce the 2 alternate members?
Sorry.
I think we did that last time, didn't we?
No, the action the city council took at their last meeting was they determined to add 2 alternates to the current body. So
Right.
it's up to them then to make a selection.
Alternates are Harry Hall and,
No. In addition to the 7 members,
they want
they want 2
9?
additional people in case a member is absent so that they could also be here to vote.
They have like alternate members.
Yes,
And if somebody doesn't show up, then they get a vote.
right. Exactly.
Who did they appoint on that?
They have not.
They haven't done it yet.
There was an applicant on the agenda for
Now,
tomorrow.
those are the ones that go in front of the council, right?
They would be
Those are the
appointed.
ones that fill out the application, and go in front of the council.
Exactly, and we had one that did apply that was to be considered tomorrow night, but has since withdrawn the application, so it's up to the council members to come forward, either with someone that they want to propose. You know, we've advertised this like we do
I
other
assume we're
boards
gonna
and
get a new
committees.
rule book then, because this rule book here says 7 people. The rules for the Budget Review Committee have 7 people on it.
There's another section, I think I provided in your packet, the code that it provides for all the boards and committees to have alternates, even though we've never actually.
Well, that's up to the city council. It makes no difference to me. I
Right.
don't care if they put 5 more on it. Yeah, it just makes no
Their
difference to me.
option, sure.
That's up to them. I don't care. I have no preference.
Mr. Chairman, we need to pass a resolution accepting the first quarter 17 budget. And to do that, I'd make a motion that we approve Resolution R 17-06.
I second it.
Okay, it's been motioned and seconded. All those in, well, the one, I didn't know we had to do that because the one I see has got council members' names on it.
What I try to do is show you what I'm going to be presenting to the council in advance, so
We
tomorrow.
just do it by consensus, right? We don't do a resolution.
In the past, the Budget Committee has acted to say you basically approve this report, but just by a motion.
Yeah, we can do that
We're
by
really
consensus.
You're not really approving the resolution, and,
That's my point.
yeah.
So the motion to accept by consensus this resolution that'll go to the city council. That was your motion, Ed?
That's correct.
And that's your second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
None opposed, it's unanimous. 6-0. Okay, now we're ready for the budget goals and the 2018 capital improvement plan. I
Yes.
assume that's you again, Ken.
Yes. My purpose of having this on the agenda is basically to let you know the motion that was adopted by the council at their previous meeting was to, as far as addressing the budget, that not one penny more than we have to maintain our quality of life will be budgeted in the next budget. So they're giving this to you as guidance, suppose, well, they're giving, period, as guidance. And I wanted to make sure you understood that. I've also provided some correspondence where the city manager reacted to the meeting. Well, actually, I reacted, sent the city manager an email trying to correct some of the statements that were made during that discussion and make sure it was understood why some numbers were different than were quoted. And city manager did pass that on to the city council and made some comments in addition to it, so I wanted y'all to have that benefit of that as well. So it's just informative for you. I presume, we're going to go about our business preparing our staff's recommendation.
Well, that's kind of an open-ended motion. Yeah, I could read that either way. I could read it to roll back or less, or I also could read it to raise the millage rate up to the maximum you're allowed to by law when you go through the trim process, if you needed that for this. It depends on how much you throw in the wagon. If you take all your capital improvements and throw them up there first and then raise the millage rate 3 or 4 mills to do these capital projects, that's not 1 penny more than you need for the thing. I could read this either way. I kind of like the rollback idea myself better because I watched that meeting.
Well, excuse me for interrupting, but as you know, it makes all the difference in the world on what you're cutting versus what you're going to be adding. You've got to keep
Exactly.
your source of funding is
Exactly.
important. So if you cut something out of DST, doesn't mean you can spend it for adding a person that's paid for out of the general fund. I mean, you've got to keep things in the correct basket. Excuse me for
Well,
interrupting.
you don't do much capital improvements out of the general fund, do you?
Very little.
You transfer a little bit over there, but it doesn't look like much to me.
There hadn't been hardly anything.
It
really.
looks like the discretionary sales tax does the heavy lifting.
The only time we
Didn't see a lot of grants in there, but, grants and sales tax, and I assume these street projects in the CIP come from gas tax money, combination of gas tax and sales tax.
We've cleaned up a lot in that area. They were being spread out. We're using gas taxes for things other than just, specific road work. This last budget year, we were able to clean that up, get gas taxes being spent on road work as opposed to paying for street light bills and some of the miscellaneous stuff that in the hard times couldn't be afforded out of general fund, so they shifted it over. So we've done a lot to clean that up. We tried to limit general fund to just the operation and maintenance type, the basic personnel we need to function with, expected repairs, things we can plan for. But as far as investing in new technology and budgeting for replacement of equipment in someone's office or a pickup truck or whatever, we try to find some other source of paying for
It's hard to
those
find
capital
grants for
items.
vehicles, even police cars. It's very difficult to find grants.
We've got, just a very limited source for vehicles. If they, sometimes they have to show up in general fund because they're not associated with like stormwater. We can use stormwater fees, or if they're not associated with a major enough piece of equipment that's got a useful life that's long enough to qualify for DST funding. So we do try to juggle all those combinations for those things we want to recommend to be replaced. So.
Now, I noticed in that discussion, they talked about some personnel needs that were unmet, but they were very vague, not specific.
My first concern, and as I'm working with the departments to put together their budget, is, what they are putting forward is their recommendations, and then, of course, whatever the city manager, as he gets involved and
Right.
has his viewpoints on what personnel needs or the city. I mean, that's my job. I'm
See, I think
gonna
those
try to
numbers
make
are
it
going
work
to
if we
determine
can.
how we
and-
look at this, not one penny more than we have to maintain the quality of life. If he says he needs 10 people, you may have to raise the millage rate, if the council puts all 10 of them in there. He may do 3 a year for 3 years. I don't know. I assume you all will come to us, let us know what that is. That'll be a part of your budget document.
We generally follow that process. We bring it to y'all and we try to say, okay, here's our baseline. Here's what we think
Yeah.
there's like no option that we need to fund these things.
Well, because what I'd like to do is listen to more to Joe's recommendation of what he thinks he needs to run the city. I mean, I wouldn't propose to try to tell the city manager that he needed to hire 5 people if he says he only needs 3.
Thank you. Yep.
It's more like we're gonna say, we'll give you 3, and he's gonna want 5. That's probably where the discussion will go.
Well, and the question is if it is agreed there's 3 more that are needed, then if we can't squeeze it into the existing level of funding, then we would probably be coming with a recommendation to council and the committee to consider some kind of other funding or additional funding. I mean, that's just the way a budget process should work.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
Ken, is this the year that we're done paying for this building? I've asked that over and over, and I keep forgetting. Is this it, or is it next year?
It's this year. If I remember reading through your notes, the DST bank note is paid off April 1st.
Okay. So,
You're
Right.
correct.
so there's a possibility.
I just want to, I was going to ask that later on, but while you brought it up, any plans for the money?
Yeah, I've got these nice other investment alternatives. The DST budget up through this last year, not knowing that the DST would be renewed this past November,
Right.
I presume that none of those, we wouldn't get any additional DST funding after, part of 2019.
I think it was 19, I think, but
December of-
the county
well, it's
renewed it
December of
early.
18, I believe.
Yeah, the county renewed it early,
But they did renew it, so
yes. It's got another 15 years.
as far as some of these monies are kind of earmarked for police cars. We're still paying on the stormwater debt. We're using DST monies to finance the stormwater, so we can use stormwater funds for improvements. But yes, we've got some, an available source for those capital items that qualify out of DST funds. We've got an open door basically to come up with capital projects that make sense. Because I didn't want us being stuck if we counted on those funds and then something happened and it wasn't approved by the.
So that could help us keep, help us when we start considering taxes. That could help us when we start considering the overall effect on the tax rate, if any. The fact that we're
The
not
biggest thing
paying it.
that affects the taxpayer are the operating costs of the city.
Yeah.
Because
That's
some, a lot of times with the capital
Yeah, it does
items,
come out
you've
of
got
DST.
some flexibility
Okay.
anyway, and we've got those earmarked funds for capital items, so. Our concern, I think, is to cover our operating costs, to address the labor negotiations that are there. There are wage opener provisions for the next 2 years. We had a 3-year contract. Last year was set at a 3% across the board increase for the employees. Years 2 and 3, this coming year and the year after, are up to negotiation. So that's an increase in the level of spending that we have.
Well, how much was the debt service payment out of the discretionary sales tax fund?
The one that we're paying off?
Yeah, the one that's paying off in April. I see this year it's budgeted at 352, but I'm assuming
But
that was,
that's the partial
that's like
year.
a fourth of it. You only got
The year before that, we were paying out 887.
a month?
No, a year, 887,000.
880, okay. So basically, then what that'll do is free up, well, it'll free up the money you had in there this year. The 352, 927, that'll get freed up to be reallocated next year to buy widgets and gadgets with.
Well, another way to put it is the revenues from the DST is about $3 million a year for us.
Right.
We carve out about, well, it varies, but figure anywhere
Looks
from.
like your debt service fund's Fund 230, and you put 352, 927 in.
Yeah, we've got 264 to 430,000 a year in that range for police vehicles or equipment.
So basically, all you're gonna free up by paying that off in April is the monthly, if you set it aside monthly, that'll go up, but you've already accounted for that in your budget. So basically, you're gonna have an additional $350,000 to spend next year because you don't have debt.
Well, we didn't budget the $3 million a year coming in the future
You only
years.
budgeted.
So you can really say that we've got a level of additional capital, if it qualifies for DST spending,
Yeah.
of almost, well, call it 225 to 250,000, call it $2.5 million, basically, that we could devote towards capital items.
Okay, help me out with the math. You said we get about $3 million a year in DST funds, but we only budget about 2.5. Is
No,
that correct
no.
for capital improvement?
No, that wasn't the whole story. There's about, looking at next year, okay, that DST debt service is gone. We still have about 400,000 paying for the stormwater debt a year. So 400 comes off the 3 million, you're down to 2.6.
Well, would it be better to take those funds that were spent here on this building and accelerate repayment on something else? Maybe we don't have additional widgets like you're saying. Maybe it would be better to accelerate.
I don't know, from what I looked at, they went 6 or 7 years and they'd do a whole lot of equipment replacement. I would imagine they've got a lot more needs than they've got ability to pay for. And I'm sure Ken makes them separate their needs from their wants.
Do my best, yeah.
Tell me what your needs are. I don't want to hear about your wants.
And I must say that we've got some pretty reasonable department heads. I don't have outlandish
Yeah.
types of things. And many times it's somebody put a bug in the ear and says, hey, you better be recommending this, and they're doing it just as somebody else's idea that's passing along, so. So we try to get to the bottom of that and do the best we can to meet with them and discuss things thoroughly. The downside of any capital, though, I would throw in another reminder, is to maintain it. If you want a new park, if you want a new
Oh, yeah.
whatever, there's a ongoing cost that
You build it, you
general
gotta take
fund
care of.
usually has to support, so.
Do you go through and do an analysis on that when you do your capital budget, what impact it's gonna have on the operating side?
I'd love to show you that in detail. I got really analytical and tried to look at like the 4 or 5, does it increase 4 or 5 factors? Like, does it increase efficiency? And it would get so many points for that. And
Yeah.
whether it's worth anything, because things
When you
happen.
build things, it always has an impact on your operating budget too. I mean, it always does. Some things you build don't have as much an impact as others, but
there's other factors than,
exactly.
safety. So I try to assign points and score I try to amortize a certain percentage depending on how many points it gets for each of those factors and combinations.
That's the way I always did mine. I just did a
Very
percentage,
analytical, yeah.
you know.
Now, whether it really means anything, because things happen and things break that you weren't expecting, so.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they didn't, but it never happens that way. Do you all budget a contingency? Do you budget a contingency in your non-departmental in case something blows up, or you just use this R&R fund?
That's been our contingency, really. And it really, a contingency from a staff's point of view is certainly more flexible because.
Well, you get more flexible, you put it in there, but you'd still have to, because you get the money appropriated, but I assume you would still spend the money in a general fund or whatever department that had to spend it, and you really wouldn't take it out of that contingency. You would reduce it cash-wise, but not, you don't show an expenditure for that.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. We had a safety problem where we wanted to add some lights in a parking lot. We don't really budget to add anything. And that R&R is used for repair or replacement of things that
Public
are
Works
already there.
budget.
So if
Street lights in a parking lot, public works problem.
well, that's always
Frank
my
can
first.
handle it.
As you know, my first option is say, are there other monies in that
Yeah.
budget that maybe we can?
But if it were big enough,
be
you would have
applied.
that R&R fund you could dip into. Did you all ever think about maybe setting up a contingency in the non-departmental and actually appropriate the money and just leave it set there?
It's a temptation to spend contingency from staff's point of view, so I'm kind of okay with maybe just,
Well, you could control that by your budget resolution. You could put language in there that once the council approved it, then you and Joe would actually spend the money where it actually belonged.
well, I try to work with, as I'm meeting with the departments, I try to get realistic numbers as far as what, historically has
Yeah.
been spent on maintenance and those kind of things. And I don't squeeze them so tight that if something comes up,
not a
if
good
it's something major, we can always go to the city council and say, hey, we've got $5 million in reserves, we'd like to keep it there in case of a storm, but hey, here's something that really needs to be added to the city to maintain our quality of life.
Yeah. Well, just because you have it in there and it's appropriated doesn't mean you have to spend it.
That would be staff's argument.
Yeah.
But so often,
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
looked
it's
at
just,
as being,
it's
well,
just
it's
something to
something
give
we're
you a
going
little more flexibility. But you guys, that's not an issue for you because you amend your budget every quarter anyway.
as needed, yes.
Yeah, I never amended my budgets in Fellsmere. I think in the 20 years I spent there, I amended the first budget I got there because it was non-compliant with Florida law. And when we did the big annexations in 2007, we had a bunch of legal fees that ran up, and I didn't have money appropriated, but I had money in the fund, so I had to modify the budget. I had to amend the budget to cover that excess revenue and those expenditures.
Yes, sir.
That lawsuit cost a lot of money. And we didn't, well, we kind of counted on it, but we didn't You know, I had to amend the budget. Other than that, by putting a contingency, I used a $500,000 contingency in the non-departmental, but I never took anything out of it. So if one department went over, if the police department had to have something, they went over $100,000, Public Works went over $50,000. I never had an appropriation problem and had to amend the budget because I had that extra money appropriated. It's just an extra tool, something to look at.
It seemed like every couple of weeks I entertain a department head
Oh, yeah.
suggestion that he doesn't have money to cover something that really needs to be done. So we try to work it out and find a way without amendments, but sometimes
Well,
it's
without having,
necessary.
you don't want to have a negative impact on your budget, but you do your budget amendments quarterly anyway, and if you've got more revenue that's coming in above budgeted, you up your revenue estimate, right?
We can do it that way, yes.
Yeah. You generally don't do that in the first quarter because in October, November, December, you don't generally see a lot of state money and sales tax money come in till the end of November. So you only got the last 30 days in the quarter to look at those numbers. They look skewed. Now, do we need to do anything on this email from Joe?
It's for your information. I don't,
Oh, okay,
no,
that's what
no
I
actions
thought.
required.
Okay, anybody got any more questions on the budgets and goals and the CIP?
I just have a question on the calendar.
On the what?
The calendar.
Okay.
Ken, on the June 12th, for us to receive the recommended CIP and operating budget, is that a pretty firm date?
All these dates are really targets. I mean, because things happen and perhaps I don't get something sent out on that exact day, or if I have it maybe a day earlier, I'd be glad to share it earlier. But if it's later, I'm not really held to it. I just try to provide a reasonable time between the dates that make sense and based on history.
Okay.
So the answer is no.
I was just looking to see how much turnaround
Well,
time we've
that's just
had.
the tentative budget. That's what you're talking about, the tentative budget on that calendar?
Well, it doesn't
on
say
June
tentative,
12th?
but it is the budget calendar, true.
Because you've only got the estimate from Dave Nolte's office in June. You don't get the actual valuation number until like the last week in June or maybe July 1st or 2nd. He's usually been putting it out pretty early.
Yes, we're thinking June 23rd. He has been a couple of weeks in advance,
Right.
but we're thinking June 23rd for this year.
Yeah, he's been hitting it that third or fourth week in June for the last 2 or 3 years. His Dave's people have really been cranking those numbers out for us. Makes it a lot easier when you do your budget.
And the preliminary number has not historically here.
It's not any good, because it may come back lower, or most generally it comes in a little higher.
It's come in generally something less than 1% lower, which gives
I
us.
think one year you guys did get lower. It came in lower.
Yeah, but
and
it's
that
been
can-
several
that
years
can
since
cause
that
an issue.
happened.
Well, the reason I ask, I'm actually concerned about getting, the wish list, so to speak, so we have a chance, the board, have more turnaround time before we have to make our final recommendation to the city. I see that we're listed here as July 10th for us to make our final recommendation to the city. So even if it's tentative, which it would be, a wish list, at least give us an idea, the board here, of what you're looking at, if there's anything that we may hear from the community that we think ought to be brought forward and may be included, or something that may not be wanted from the community, or they may feel that it's not needed. Anyhow, it gives us some time to look at it, talk to the community, come back and talk among ourselves and see what we think, and before we try to make our own recommendation. So I was just curious if that was cast in stone, if that's your target that you're really shooting for, or if you think it may vary a few
These
days.
meetings always have a public input session on them here, right? The public's perfectly invited to come in here and sit and tell us what they think, right?
That's our next item on the
Oh,
agenda.
absolutely.
yes.
So we don't have to wait. We don't have to wait till then to hear from the public.
No, what I mean is if we don't know what they're recommending, how do we discuss it with our neighbors and so forth? So when we see the wish list, then it gives us some turnaround time. And I was just wondering, looking at this, if that was a good target date, because that gives me an idea of how much turnaround time I have to speak to my neighbors and so forth, and get an idea of what I want to discuss among the board members here.
I mean, with the budget committee, we have to sandwich your process and your decision-making and information gathering and questioning with our need to first, as staff, to review and discuss with departments and take inputs that we get from the community and from the council and all our sources. And your activity is sandwiched in between the deadline of the council actually getting a recommendation from y'all. So you don't want us coming out and throwing ideas willy-nilly at every little session that we have, that at the end of the day, we look at the whole and decide there's no way this project can be given up. And before you go cutting this other one, here's why you shouldn't be cutting the other one, because you need that as bad.
Well,
So, I
willy-nilly
mean,
is-
there's got to be that prep time, and I'm happy to give it to you as soon as
I
I had
understand.
that process completed, but
This is your calendar, and I was just asking you about your date that you were telling us, if that looked like it was a realistic time frame. And as far as willy-nilly, no. This would be our first opportunity to see what you are putting out as a wish list, a preliminary list based on how the numbers would come in from the county as far as taxes and so forth, the property appraiser. I understand that, but that'd be our first opportunity to see what you're presenting, and that'd be our first chance to see if we saw anything in there that we thought might need to be included, recommended to the city council, or if there are things in there that maybe we felt like don't need to be in there. Now, this is what I understand, you're working with the city council and you're getting feedback from them and you're trying to make up your plan. But until we see it, we have no idea which direction you're going. And that's why I was wondering about that. Because looking at the dates, of course, you can say, well, down here in August and all, if we wanted to, we could change things. But normally, when you get past that July 12th date and you go submitting your millage, recommended millage, you're pretty much cast in stone after that. We all know that. I mean, so really, it's a few-week time frame up there that we have to try to get something included or excluded. And I was just wondering about how realistic that date might be.
okay. I mean, you can change somewhat, but, you know, you still need some substantial blocks of time, so, you know, getting a day or two different doesn't make an impact. A week or two, that can really throw off the whole process.
Because the way I understand it is that we, like the board, would like to support what the city council is wanting to ratify as their budget. And if the board comes in here supporting what the city council wants to do, it makes the public feel a lot better about the process. And that's all where I was coming from.
And we've aimed to please the budget committee and the city council both, so it's a challenge.
Okay. We're up to item number 8, public input, and I see no public here, so I assume we're going to have no public input. So we're number 9, staff matters. Ken?
Yeah, I just had a note to brag again about completing a comprehensive report in a faster time frame this year. Based on the chair's request, we are set up now to give you the monthly printouts of each account on a monthly basis.
Yeah,
Same-
that quarterly on that's fine, on the calendar quarters, that thing that you sent me. And I don't, if the other members want it, they can tell you,
Okay.
but that helps me. But quarterly is really all I need, that, Ken.
Okay,
Just on the calendar quarters, and I really only want it after you've made, like in January, when you've made your adjustments for December, print it then. When you get to March and you've made whatever adjustments you make in April to close March out, I would
Okay.
like to see March after you've done your adjusting entries.
Okay. We can set it up that way. I mean, we just got you in the same cycle as we send to each department for their review and their
Yeah,
control of their budget.
that's fine on
We
the
just
calendar
gave you
quarter.
another copy, so
I don't need it monthly, that's just,
we'll save the paper or the
That's-
email effort, I guess.
yeah, save me a lot of paper. But quarterly is plenty on that, that's really all I need to see it. I don't need to see it any more than that.
Okay, those were the only staff matters that I had.
And I don't know if any of the rest of them want that, I don't know if they looked at that, because I assume you emailed that to everybody, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I don't imagine they printed that, it's too much paper, that's what's it.
40 pages.
Well, it's useful for me, though, I mean, that's. And I'm gonna have to go get a copy of the budget from you. Do you have extra copies of the budget, or will I have to go online and print it?
I can certainly provide one for you.
Okay.
Does
I'd like to have
any other members need,
the current year budget.
you like the actual document?
Because what I've been doing is going online and making notes.
Okay.
I've been going online in your budget and making notes. And to read it'd just be easier if I had the book to look at, and that way I could write my notes right in the book.
So I will provide one to Committee Member Hall and Moda. Anyone else want a hard copy of the budget besides Larry?
You already got one? Yeah. Is that it from your end, Ken?
Yes.
Okay. Number 10, committee member matters. Comments and discussions by individual members. I'll start down at the right end this time. Nothing this evening. Ed?
I just, for everybody remember that we have for the past few years done a PowerPoint presentation to the city council of what we're proposing. If we're just going along with staff recommendation, we say so, and we highlight the key things. So we should be thinking about that as it comes along. Just a reminder that we have done that in the past.
Is that this committee does that, or they get your staff does that?
Well, no.
We do it.
The committee does it?
What,
You do it?
what I have done is I've put together the PowerPoint draft, and then I've sent it to Ken, who then, so that we do the sunshine law properly, then Ken sends it out to everybody. So you look at it, comment on it, any changes that are made in it, come back to Ken, Ken gets them to me, I put them in the PowerPoint, and then we show the PowerPoint to the city council. That's the way it's done. That's the way we have done it in the past.
I don't see anything wrong with that. I think that's probably a pretty good idea.
Yeah, we have no expectation that you're simply going to say whatever staff said is, our staff's not going to.
Yeah, I don't see any reason to start making changes in what they're used to seeing from this committee. I mean,
I think
that's, if
it's a
they're
good
used to
practice.
seeing that.
It does, you're speaking as a committee to give the council and the public a blessing, basically, either on what staff recommended, or you disagree, and you say, well,
Yeah.
bless staff for doing a good job, but here's some areas that we think should also be handled. I mean, that's kind of the way the input should work. It shouldn't just,
So, Ed,
we
do-
shouldn't be a unanimous voice necessarily.
What we did 3 years ago, when we got started on this road thing, the council kept talking about roads, but the council didn't talk about money. And ultimately, the committee decided that, in talking with staff and so on and so forth, that we'd come up with X number of dollars. And that meant raising the tax rate. And we took that to the city council. And we did a PowerPoint presentation, and they did it. It wasn't unanimous, but they did it. And that's how we got started, finally, to fix the road situation here, because we were so far behind. This place used to be pothole heaven. And We've gone an awful long way to fix that. So I don't see anything for this year that we're gonna have that kind of thing going on. But at this point, I have no idea. But we have done those kinds of things where we've gone to the
Well,
council.
we're not gonna know till they present us their tentative budget, and we get a look at what they're asking for.
Well, we'll know before. We always have, if there is a key item, because between now and June, Ken will tell us. We're talking about this, we're thinking about that.
Because I'm assuming you're gonna be looking at adding some personnel this cycle, from the comments I took at that last council meeting they had. There seemed to be a lot of discussion about
Yeah,
staffing
it's-
issues.
I don't know, I've not been involved in too many discussions at a staff level yet of
Yeah.
whether we agree with some of the public comments or have other ideas.
Well, this is just the council floating ideas out, when they had that kind of like, I took that meeting when they did that piece of it there was kind of to give us direction, what they kind of wanted us to look at and do. That's the way I took that meeting. And I seemed to hear personnel issues. Need for additional personnel. I heard that from more than
Well-
one council person.
Yeah, I want you to understand, the meeting backup materials had a list of items from Councilman Dodd. And good for him for, bring it, something to discuss or to throw out there. The council didn't go into much discussion of those detailed items because they did focus on
They just did
the millage and keeping things at a level that.
no more in the budget than needed to maintain the quality of life.
So the only actual action they took as far as direction to the committee to
And
pass
see,
on
that'll
to
be
you.
also a function of what the valuations come in. Because you guys been doing a lot of building this year. I assume there's gonna be a lot of new growth in that number this year when he gives you that number. And of course, you don't get the breakdown in June, right? You won't get that till the end of June or early in
June
July, when he
20.
actually gives you the DR 420 and not just a letter.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend this board continue the process or procedure of doing a PowerPoint presentation to the city council.
Yeah, I don't see any reason to change that.
I was wondering if all the other board members feel the same.
I would agree.
Yeah.
And Ed, do you volunteer to do that?
If that's what the board wants, I don't have a problem doing it because, and what we do, the easiest thing is, it grows off last year's.
Yeah, right.
And, I mean, physically, it grows off last year's, so you can go in
I
and change.
appreciate your volunteer to do that, Ed. I think that'd be a good idea to continue that.
Okay. The other thing that we might consider, and we've talked about it before, is that if there is enough stuff to discuss, that we have a meeting before June. We might have a meeting in May, but that's pretty much up to Ken and what Ken's got to say. If he's got nothing to say, there's no sense in having a meeting. But, and whether Griffin's got something, and if he wants to come and talk about and sell people things, if that's what he's up to. I have no read of his mind.
I mean, we do operate as a team, and I'm sure the city manager or myself think that the committee could have a heads up, that would be beneficial for the process. I'm
Yeah,
sure we
we'd
would
appreciate it.
be trying to create a special meeting and get as many of you together as we could. And another factor is these two alternate positions. If something develops on that within the next 30 days or so, we might
Now,
want to
I'm
have.
assuming if they're here, and like now, we've got, what do we got here, 6? There's 6 of us. We've still got one that has an excused absence. So if we had the other 2, then one of those 2 would be able to
Step in
actually vote.
and vote, or
Now, will they be allowed to participate in the discussions as an alternate member?
I
Or do they have
presume,
to sit there like a lump?
I think that's probably the chair's call. I don't know the legal answer to that, but I'm
Whose call?
the chair, yourself.
Oh,
And also, if you've got a need for one member to make a additional alternate
Yeah.
to make a quorum, which one do you choose?
yeah, I've always believed in an open door policy. If they're here, as far as I'm concerned, they can talk and say whatever their input would be gladly accepted. They just won't be able to vote, right? If we had a full 7 members here, those other 2 alternates would not be allowed to vote.
Exactly.
And that's fine. I don't have any issue with that.
Larry, the reason behind the alternate this year is we have 2 or 3 meetings?
I think there were actually 3 meetings.
Three meetings, we did not have a quorum.
On this budget review committee?
Yep. Right in the middle of the budget period. And believe me, it was embarrassing.
That's not a good thing.
No. But here's the problem that this committee has, is that all of our work gets done right in the peak vacation season.
In the summertime,
So
yeah.
people disappear. Even though we put this calendar out and we talk about it, we lose people. And so we had a discussion about this a little while ago, and I said to Joe Griffin, I said, why don't we have alternate like P and Z? He looked at me, he didn't look
Yeah,
at
it
me.
makes sense to me, because
Yeah.
the goal of this thing is there's 7-member committee, so we gotta have 4, right?
Right. So
Yes.
that's what we're going to do if we can round up 2 people. That's where we are. And that's the background of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. That's,
More voices to be heard, more links to the meeting, so be prepared.
well, it's a
'cause,
different
I mean,
set of
if
eyes
everybody
to
wants to
look at it.
participate, then it is gonna-
Everybody has their own idea of what they wanna look at when they look at this stuff. Now, I know I look at it a lot different than a lot of other people do. And Harry too, probably, but we've had a multitude of years doing these things.
Granted, yes.
And we know the legalese behind it and all that stuff, getting it through the state and all that stuff. That's the hardest part. That's the hardest part of your job, getting trim compliance completed. Putting the budget together is actually pretty easy. Just a bunch of numbers, right, Ken? Michael?
I think until we hear from Joe and we get a firm idea as to what we're gonna be looking for capital improvements, and we have some idea as to what the tax valuations are gonna be, I think we can sit and spitball. Again, like I said last week, not to be redundant, but I think that's what we have to wait and see
That's
before we
early
can
in
speak
January.
educatedly.
Yeah.
And then actually start to go along with the edict from council.
I just want to add, I am at your disposal. If you have questions, you want to spend some time, give me a heads up, please, to say,
Yeah.
can I come by the office 2 o'clock tomorrow or something?
I came over here the other day and I thought I went to the county jail. Geez, I need badges to get through the door and all kinds of stuff over here. When do you all get so security conscious over here? You can't even walk in City Hall and go in a department?
Got to have a badge.
That lady had me standing down there for 10 minutes.
Oh. Maybe she'll get to know your face, but
Then
we
finally she
do
said,
require a
"Do you-"
badge to get access.
Finally, she asked me, do you know where the city clerk's office is? I said, yes. She said, well, let me give you this badge, and then you just go up there.
Oh, during the election.
Thank
sure.
you.
Yeah.
Harry, you're up?
I've said more than my piece tonight, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good, Mr. Martin.
Sergio?
I'm good.
And I'm good. I'll wait. I'm like Michael, I'll just wait to see what they throw in front of me and see, because of course, it's real early in the process to start putting anything together like that yet, and even trying to guess I used to try to do estimates of what I thought the valuation was gonna be, and with the last 4 or 5 or 6 years, the way those things jumped around, I got pretty close to just using 5%. 5% growth. Our growth in Fellsmere was we only had 2 years that we had negative, the valuations went down. We only had 2 years of that. And I know a lot of cities had 5 or 6 years of that. I think the county went through 5 or 6 years of valuation
Sure we did too,
declines.
yes.
Proposed topics for next meeting? I guess just more of the same, huh? Just the change the date on the agenda and reprint it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Unless any member has something else they'd like to discuss. But I'll be having some discussions with you, direct.
That'd be good.
Won't take up time here for that, because it's,
Yeah, I would caution everybody as far as sunshine law, because you guys have been around long enough to be aware of that, but there's no problem with you passing on, if you hear something at a council meeting or a public forum, and you want to call me and say, well, in your opinion, you think the committee should meet.
well, I assume the ones of us that were appointed by specific council people will have little birdies whispering in our ear through the process,
I would expect to.
I would imagine.
One thing about the sunshine law, and we've talked it over and over, but we remind people every year about it, if you're not familiar with it, you have to you can't send each other a memo. You have to send it to Ken. Why? It gets captured in the city system. It becomes part of the public record. So any email that you send, any and even the telephone, the number gets captured, or does the conversation get captured?
No, telephone conversations don't, but you still have to follow the rules. You can't just communicate by telephone
No, but
properly.
you got to email it through Ken.
Well, that's just on this committee. That's not talking to a council person, because we're not on the same board.
That's correct.
Sunshine law would only cover this committee for us, as far as we're
Same
concerned.
decision makers, yes, right.
And we would not be able to discuss anything that might reasonably, in the foreseeable future, would come on an agenda in front of us that we would have to vote on.
And I'm happy to operate as basically a receiver of your concerns or your request,
Yeah.
but.
Well, that'd be
I
good, so
cannot
everybody
take a-
could see what the other one did, and you'd be the focal point to disseminate that information.
But I just caution you, I'm not in a position under the law to take a poll, for instance.
Right.
Yeah,
You
don't
can't-
tell me to see if everybody else wants to do this, because I can't go there.
No, you can't poll us to find out what we're gonna do.
You take it in and you put it back out again.
Some attorneys say you can poll the members, you just can't discuss the results of your poll with other members of the same body.
Oh, okay.
But we always recommend our attorney, the attorneys that I've dealt with, I've been dealing with sunshine law for 30 years in Florida. And you take the most conservative approach and you just don't do it. Period, in the discussion, you just don't do it. Because if somebody sees you, and we instruct our council people, we always did, to try to shy away from each other at public meetings. If you were to, say, a county commission meeting and two of you appeared and walked in there, what do? Somebody gets up and walks out of the room.
It's all about appearance, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because somebody could go to the state attorney with a camera. Everybody's a movie star now with these smartphones and everything. And the state attorney was starting an investigation. So that was a good point, Ed. We got to be very cognizant of the sunshine law, but that would only cover us. We're free to talk to our council members about anything we want to. Okay. Next meeting date, looks like it's set Monday, June the 5th, right?
Unless something comes up that we,
And that's,
Think
you
would
should
be
have
worth your
the
time.
estimate, you should have the estimated letter from David Nolte's people on that meeting. Yeah, that usually comes out right on the 1st. He's actually been sending that out early too.
few days, yeah.
I think that covers the agenda. Any other items from any board member? For the good of the order, this meeting is adjourned.